There was this whole flurry. It always happens in that time between to finish the mix and the film actually gets 2 weeks into release. There's this flurry of panicked studio executives and sometimes producers that are really worried that something's gone dreadfully wrong. It was funny. This film went through really goofy stuff. Biggest clamor was something was wrong with the opening title, that when it hit, it just wasn't exciting enough. It's actually a better, more high-fidelity recording of the orchestra, and it's visually, it's synced up exactly the same way, the same number of frames between the Fox logo and the title card and the hit. All that's the same, and yet big complaint was, well, it's not loud enough, or it's not right, I don't feel right, it's not exciting enough. Vague stuff, but coming very strongly right in the first pre-release screenings. I think we were dealing with expectations. What was happening was they were showing the film, and they weren't getting that huge audience applause. They weren't getting that Star Wars on the screen, and then the audience just goes into a huge cheer and chaos. It wasn't a verbal reaction until it might have been when you first saw R2 or 3PO or something like that.
The opening crawl of the movie represented a major event for me personally, in so much as I had worked on the Star Wars Special Edition for about 3 years, and I had waited in line for hours to see the very first film when I was 20 years old. So it was a very, very moving time for me when I actually saw the first crawl, the opening crawl with George Lucas in a theater. It was a major moment for me.
Captain.
Yes, sir.
Tell them we wish to board at once.
With all due respect, the ambassadors...
All the ships in this scene here, the Nemoidian battleships for the blockade, are still photos mapped onto cards.
Perfectly legal, and we'd be happy to receive the ambassadors.
One thing I wanted to do with the Nemoidians was to dub them in alien language, to give them a more consistent alien character. But since they carried the political exposition for the film, what they had to say was very important. And we didn't feel we could give them an alien voice and subtitle it at the same time. That'd just be too much for people to read and listen to all at once.
The thrusters on the Republic cruiser are from a propane torch that I took out onto the stage and shot with a high-8 camera.
The art department was set up as a separate unit by George for Phantom Menace because George likes an art department that can work closely with him. We were formed while George was writing, which is a very rare case, so we get to experience the storytelling through the design process. We're involved in conceptualizing everything from the beginning. We pre-plan all the different environments. We design all the characters, all the vehicles, all the costumings, and so forth. And it's all to help George tell his story.
Elusive.
Don't center on your anxieties, Obi-Wan.
It was extraordinary to stand in front of the mirror with all my wardrobe on and stuff. Because I was Obi-Wan Kenobi, and it was quite a moment for a young man. Become Obi-Wan Kenobi. It was good look.
How do you think this trade viceroy will deal with the Chancellor's demands?
These Federation types are cowards.
I play a Jedi Master. I like to think of him as a kind of a timeless sort of soul. He's a wise soul. And in the pecking order, I guess he comes under the character of Yoda, who is like a kind of a supreme Jedi. Very skilled in sort of martial arts and in, I guess, a kind of Eastern philosophy and way of life. Almost kind of like a monk. That's what I like to think of him as. And he propagates good in these various missions that he and his apprentices go on throughout these galaxies.
I've been working a lot on studying Alec Guinness in the 3 movies. Been doing a lot of dialogue coaching, try and get a younger sounding version of his voice. It's quite tricky, because in a lot of his younger films he's playing with an accent anyway, but that's been one of the challenging parts, is to try and get that down. But in the films he has a kind of fatherly voice. There's something really paternal about him, quite calming and straight, because he knows exactly what he's about, and he's been sitting in the desert for a long time sorting himself out. So I think he's very centered. He's got a very centered voice and a very kind of paternal voice. It all influences me because I'm meant to be him, so everything he does has influenced me.
When we started in this movie, we knew there was going to be a lot of visual effects. What we didn't know at the time when we started was that by the time we'd finished, there was only going to be one shot in the entire film that does not have any visual effects in it. And that's the shot of the gas coming out of that grill in the conference room. One of the backstories on the battle droids who we see throughout the film is I wanted to make sure that we had a different kind of motion for them. We knew that we were going to be animating a lot of organic characters like the Gungans and the animals and the birds. And I wanted to make sure that the battle droids looked slightly different. The other interesting thing about the battle droids was that George's notion of that these weren't a very sophisticated technology in terms of this galaxy, that they were the first generation of this kind of attack droid, and that the way that they worked was they had to be in constant communication with the master of the mothership. The mothership would beam down directions, and that there would be a certain amount of delay before the battle droid would react. And we see that when the Jedi meet them. They tell the Jedi to stop, and then there's a little moment for a second that says, well, wait a second, you can't get on the ship, and then they slice them apart. We also created a library of sliced droids, so we knew that they got sliced in the neck and the chest and the leg. And depending on where Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon were slicing them, we would put in the correct droid and then have the pieces rattle on the ground using a simulation effect.
Yeah, this melting door scene is a direct homage to Forbidden Planet. We looked at the melting Krell door in Forbidden Planet as inspiration. I really liked how this lightsaber cutting the door effect turned out. It's computer graphics. It's a blobby system.
Creating that molten effect.
Yeah.
They are still coming through. This is impossible.
And then this is actually charcoal briquette effect we did out on the stage.
Destroy the cars. Master!
Here comes the destroyer droids, or they later called them droidicars. There are three-legged droids. Always loved their design. They were a little bit of a challenge to animate because they have 3 legs. They were fine rolling. If you imagine a 3-legged creature walking, you'll see it coming up here in a second. It took us quite a while to figure this out and get this to look like they actually could move down the hallway.
Much for droidicars.
Sir, they've gone up the ventilation.
Wheel droids. They are a little bit more powerful and dangerous than the regular battle droids, which means that the Jedi can't automatically just cut through them. The one problem with making an invincible hero is that there's nobody to stop them. You don't have any drama. They have to obviously come up against some force that drives them off the ship, and we use the wheel droids to do that.
Stow aboard separate ships and meet down on the planet.
You were right about one thing, Master. The negotiations were short.
Sir, a transmission from the planet.
It's Queen Amidala herself. At last, we are getting results. Again, you come before us, Your Highness.
You will not be so pleased when you hear what I have to say, Viceroy. Your trade boycott of our planet has ended.
I was not aware of such failure.
I have heard that the Chancellor's ambassadors are with you now, and that you have been commanded to reach settlement.
I know nothing of any ambassadors. You must be mistaken.
Beware, Viceroy. The Federation has gone too far this time.
We would never do anything without the approval of the Senate. You assume too much.
We will see.
She's right.
The Senate
It's
will
too late
never.
now.
Do you think she suspects an attack?
I don't know, but we must move quickly to disrupt all communications down there.
So this is one of the establishing shots of Theed. The waterfalls are actually salt, dropping 12 to 14 feet down. Most of it's a digital matte painting in 3 dimensions.
I have assurances from the Chancellor. His ambassadors did arrive.
We've done a lot of holograms and hologram transmissions over the years, and the sound of the voices is usually actually broadcast over a shortwave radio and received and then mistuned a bit to give that sidebanding effect of an actual transmission.
It can mean only one thing: invasion.
Federation would not dare go.
This takes place in an actual palace in Italy. Unfortunately, they had large candelabras on all the walls and columns, so those had to be removed digitally after the entire movie was shot.
This is a dangerous situation, Your Highness. Our security volunteers will be...
She is really ultimately the central character, and the story they're telling is really her story.
The story called for the droids to go down to the planet's surface and for the troop transport ships to be deployed. George wanted to have this notion of these huge, enormous ships pushing through the trees, and that out in front of them would be all the poor creatures that were caught in their way.
We've searched the ship, and there is no trace of the Jedi. They may have gotten on one of your landing craft.
If they're down here, sir.
We needed to create all these creatures inside the computer because we weren't able to, shoot any real animals, and George wanted them to be from this different planet. So we have a whole number of species that you're going to see in this stampede sequence. There are the Philumposets, which are the big sort of moose-like characters. There's the Pico-Picos, which are the flying birds. There's the Nunas, which are the little fat turkeys running in the foreground there. There's a number of other ones, the Motts, the little dog-like creatures. When we actually shot this sequence at Leavesden in England, there were no trees. It was a swamp section that was probably 50 feet by 100 feet, and I had real concerns of how we were going to pull this off. Once we got into it, and Dennis and his team got involved, they heard that it's either Caltrans or one of the utility companies was going to be cutting down some huge trees, and they sent a crew over to shoot those big trees being knocked down, and they were able to combine those into the sequence to make it look really real.
Servant! That won't be necessary.
That's what it is. Tis demanded by the...
It's our first introduction to Jar Jar on the show. And Jar Jar, of course, is all computer graphics in the show, and it was quite a challenge to get it. We're lucky to have Amon Best, who is a terrific actor who was shot as a reference, but a lot more than a reference. He established a lot of the character and everything of Jar Jar. And then we shot a take without him and let the animators and Rob go to work on giving him the Jar Jar personality and all.
But the safest place would be Gonga City. It's where I grew up. Tis a hidden...
The main issue here is that the Jedi have to get to warn the Queen of the planet, but they have to trek through this swamp to get there. And in the process, they make friends with the secondary characters, Jar Jar. The real issue for them is how are they going to get to their goal at this point. The plot is a little bit goal-oriented. Can they get to the Queen before the Trade Federation gets there? So there's a bit of a time clock, and that's really what drives the plot along in this first third of the picture. Can they rescue her before she is wiped out and captured by the Trade Federation?
Pieces and blast us into oblivion.
Ah. Your point is well seen. This way. Hurry.
How much further?
We're going underwater, okay, Dad?
I played Jar Jar Binks, who is from this place called Otto Gunga, which is on the planet of Naboo. It's this underwater city.
In our day for warm welcomes.
I don't think either of us really knew what the character was supposed to be about. George was looking for the movement of the character, and we knew he was an amphibian. We knew he was a bit clumsy, but we didn't really develop a personality. Well, he didn't really tell me the personality of Jar Jar when we started. It kind of grew from when we started. And as we were reading the lines and as we were going over it, Jar Jar's personality just began to erupt, just out of nowhere. I think the reason why I was chosen is because he dug the way I moved. And Jar Jar is very much a movement character. A lot of his actions and a lot of what he does and what he says comes from his movement. And the whole purpose for him being where he is and the whole purpose for him being who he is as far as being the Jedi sidekick comes from the fact that he's a big, clumsy amphibian.
I like the idea of an underwater city and a race of amphibians, which is really the original concept of where Jar Jar came from, was to have this underwater world. We're moving the plot along as how they're going to get to the Queen, but at the same time we're establishing an entire new race and environment and people who come to play a pivotal role in the climax of the movie, based on this particular scene in which it's established that the Gungans basically have low self-esteem in relationship to the people on the other side of the planet who live on the town of Theed and the humans. So what we've got here are two different societies, one that thinks it's less than the other. Not that they were treated any less, but that is their mindset. It's a common issue in relationships between societies because the people who live above ground have a different kind of technology, and they can fly into outer space and they have more contact with the outside worlds. This world is much more closed, and therefore thinks of itself as inferior. And obviously one of the key plot points is that this particular race realizes through the conduct of the Queen that they are considered equal.
What happens to one of you will affect the other. You must understand this.
We should no care about Nabu.
And speed is on our way.
Boss Nass is, of course, one of our cameo characters, and you can see here with his flesh and his clothing, he was a challenging character to do, but he was a lot of fun to animate. What we call carry animation or caricature animation is in the facial performance. It's a piece of software that we wrote here. I think it gives us the real subtlety of performance that you see in all the muscles in the face. Other challenge with Boss Nass, of course, is his clothing. He's wearing this big robe, and it had to look convincing in terms of when it was bending and how it was folding, because in the world of Star Wars, you're able to compare digital clothing to real clothing on a frame-by-frame basis. So you as an audience are going to believe in it or not believe in it based on how well we're doing our job. Clothing doesn't necessarily mean just clothing. If you look at Jar Jar's ears or Boss Nass's ears, his are actually tied behind him at this point. They're also flopping around and reacting to his body. You can see they can rub up against his shoulders or bounce against his back, depending on how fast he's moving. That secondary animation will help you believe in that character and believe that it's a physical being.
Life belongs to me now.
Binks? You, sir, have no life.
See all the ribbings around on the outside that are holding up, that are keeping the water out. That boss is right in front of one of those ribs. And anytime you get back and look at them, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing like a round object with a structure holding it together and then a membrane on top of it. And the way we talked about it was that membrane is a translucent membrane that you could walk through. And you see at one point, you see them walking through the membrane and it sort of squeegees them dry as they go through it. So if you go through it slowly, you can just get right through it. But something like water pressure keeps it out, so the water can't get in.
At the same time, I'm able to put a threat into this and create a situation where there's danger and it turns into an action set piece.
But, a small part of it would be Miss Clumsy.
You were banished because you were clumsy.
Here we're able to give a little bit of background on Jar Jar, why he gets banished, why he's an outcast.
One of our big monsters, Opie, and that school of fish. School of fish really helps add the scale to that shot. It wasn't originally in the shot, and I think Dennis asked for it to be put in there. I think it really helps us, because you don't really have a sense of how big the submarine is really until you see the fish compared to it, and then you see immediately, you get an idea.
Go with this!
And of course, we think it's big until this guy shows up, Sando, who snaps him in half. During the production, that character's head was actually redesigned because it wasn't giving us the kind of scale that we needed. The eye needed to be much smaller, and we moved it to the front of the head, and that big wide shot really gives you an idea of how massive that thing is.
Is on schedule, my lord.
I have the Senate bogged down in procedures. They will have no choice but to accept your control of the system.
The Queen has great faith that the Senate will side with her.
Queen Amidala is young and naive.
When we were doing Jedi, there was the rumor that George had 9 films in his head, and he clearly just completed 3 of them. That was just a rumor. And then I got to hear that George was indeed going to make those prequels, and that he was coming to London and he wanted to see me. He explained to me, not in great detail, as you can imagine, but the trajectory of the 3 movies and my character in relation to that. But he talked about 2 people. I didn't understand at that time that those 2 might be merged into one, because he wasn't going to tell anybody that. And he talked about this perfectly ordinary, rather charming politician who one day became emperor.
What yet? Monsters out there, leaking in here, all sinking and no power? You're thinking we're in trouble.
I'm able to see Jedi in a difficult situation, not panic, and basically, be brave in the way they conduct themselves. So you always have to keep that storyline moving along at the same time you're with your main characters and telling the story.
My daughter Emma, who was only 4 months old at the time, had an interesting baby cry and almost a growl. And I recorded her and then slowed her way down and ran into the subwoofer, and she became the sound of the sea monster that eats the other beast at the end of the submarine sequence.
Head for that outcropping.
Oh, boy.
The little staps that the battle droids are riding, the sound for those was created from an electric razor moving over the surface of an overturned metal salad bowl.
Many of the shots in Theed, especially this one, were done as actual miniatures at 1/30th scale. So most of that was built and photographed in the back of ILM, including this shot here. And then establishing matte paintings were done of distant objects and buildings and horizons. And the tank and all the characters were added in the background later to these. The models were all built as modular buildings so we could rearrange them for different shots. So here we see the sub popping out, and the sub is a computer graphic in that shot. And all the water was real. That was photographed in the Bay Area here. And we had to match in all the motions and put in water reflections on the side. So here we see some, I think, motion captured.
These are motion captured droids. What we did was built a full-size version of the steps here at ILM and had one of the animators walk down the stairs in a motion capture suit. And we were able to capture their movement and then apply it to the droids.
And then what you'll see as we pan across here, there's an actual statue down there. This was many of the cases where we ended up replacing that and changing what was down there. This particular scene, George wanted to change the timing of the people walking in, so we actually cut them out of another shot, put them in this, and slipped the sync.
There's very little set in these sequences. Mostly it's just a few people wandering around in little hallways here and on a surface that we'd created. But the rest of it's been added in.
I wanted a lightsaber that works, because that's the frustrating thing about this movie is, of course, nothing's really that real. So lightsaber doesn't go.
I'd started working all this stuff out when we were doing episode 1. The fights are so long. In episode 1, they were long, and certainly in episode 3, they're even longer. That they start to affect the fabric of the film or the storyline. So unless you do your homework and, even if it's wrong, but you sort out how you're going to make those characters fight or how they're going to fight, it kind of works. It follows the story. It keeps the pace of the film.
There are too many of them.
What I had in mind for this, after watching the first Star Wars films, was that you would see that they had studied every single style, so that there weren't any loose shots at all in any one of the fights. There weren't any lightsabers into walls. There weren't any swings and misses.
My feelings tell me they will destroy you.
Our only hope is for the Senate to...
They're quite intense, and they're, it's interesting. I mean, I've done maybe 4 or 5 films where I've had to do quite serious sword fighting. So I have a kind of a grounding in it. But with these, and Nick Gillard, the stunt director, who's fabulous on fights, is getting us to... it's a fine line between using a saber and using something that's actually going to be created afterwards and digitally as regards that light and that kind of laser effect. You have to kind of cut and thrust, but yet it has to be done with very, very gentle kind of fast movements, but very kind of gentle at the same time. It's kind of hard to get that, without it being like groaning, because these guys are supposed to be very centered. And when they use their lightsabers, they're extensions of themselves, Kind of like I would imagine what samurai warriors were like with their samurai swords,
Go!
There were no stunt people running around, so both Ewan and Liam were pantomiming this lightsaber fight with nobody there.
Yeah, and we ended up having to choreograph exactly where the dead droids would fall. Okay, we killed 3 over here, so we have to add those, and then they kills 2 over here. because we wanted to keep a continuity going on.
Yeah.
The other problem we had to watch out for is where people walked in the sequences, because we wanted to make sure they didn't step on one of the droids, because that would give away the whole gag.
Scott and I actually came up with a master layout, top view of every scene that he and I did together, where we had all the slicing droids, so we knew where all the bodies were as the sequence progressed, and creating that map really helped us out in figuring out how to lay out the shot.
Shield generator's been hit!
That shot of R2 popping up and rolling down to the engine area is the only full body computer generated R2 in the movie. There are other shots where we've got a computer generated head. For the most part, we tried to shoot R2 as a live element where we could. It's a large scale close up section of the ship. There's little animated graphic screens just everywhere in this movie.
Power's back! That little droid did it! Bypassed the main power drive. Deflector shields up at maximum.
Always love the attention to detail you did there, John, with the little tiny R2 on the back of the ship as it zips by camera.
If you look very carefully, you can see R2 climbing back into that hole.
We'll have to land somewhere to refuel and repair the ship.
Here, Master. Tatooine. It's small, out of the way.
The first time I was here, I was amazed. Every area you went into, there seemed to be about 300 people working away, you know. And there have been a lot of people, I think, working away for a long time. George, first of all, taken with the scale of the thing. I can't imagine how big it was. And then the props room, I remember, because it's just all guns and stuff, all the bits. It was incredible to see them all. And then I met R2-D2 for the first time, which was quite a moment. I was actually screaming out loud when I walked in there. There was about 50 guys working in this props room. I was actually screaming, "Whoa! Whoa!" But they looked at me as if they understood, so it was all right. It was a bit like meeting the Queen or something, you know? It was quite an honoured moment. Thank God there's no stormtroopers. I'd be out of control on the floor, just with excitement that they're there.
I'm the Sith Lord. His name's Darth Maul, and he's like the bad guy, the bad Sith Lord. And he uses all his negative energy to fight good or try and transfer good to evil. I think we all have a bit of a dark side in us, and so I just try and bring that out myself. So it's fun, really, you know, when I play the character.
An extremely well put together little droid, Your Highness. Without a doubt, it saved the ship as well as our lives.
It is to be commended. What is its number?
R2-D2, Your Highness.
Thank you, R2-D2. Padme. Clean this droid up as best you can. It deserves our gratitude.
There's always this challenge in scenes of introducing all the characters, have all the characters come together, especially when you got a movie like this that is constantly adding new characters in all the time. You can spend a great deal of time with introductions and that sort of thing, but obviously this is an ensemble piece that goes on for quite a while. So the main job of the first episode really is to introduce characters.
Sorry. Who, sir, are you, sir?
I'm Padme.
Lisa Jar Jar Binks.
You're a Gungan, aren't you?
A film like this is a tremendous job for the dialogue editors, because not only is there an enormous amount of replaced dialogue which they have to record and synchronize into the actors' mouths, there's so many characters that need new voices altogether. The battle droids, the Nemoidians, many other aliens that they meet. And it's kind of taken for granted in the end that the dialogue is just a natural thing, which probably occurred on the set under the microphone, but it's hardly the case in a Star Wars film.
The Queen's people are romantics. They take pleasure in high art. And so all their furniture, their vehicles, their costuming, whatever, reflect that. It really pushed the envelope for us. I mean, we were designing spaceships with these really elegant tails that really serve no function, but they look beautiful.
In the Force.
I feel it also, Master.
Don't let them send any transmissions.
The son doing murder to Mrs. Sin.
Wait!
One of the things we did with Jar Jar, of course, was to create a series of different walks. Right now he's doing what I call the hot sand walk. You have to remember, when you're animating a character that just exists in the computer, you need to get into the head of the character. And I knew, of course, that Jar Jar was from a water planet. He'd never been to a desert planet before. So you put in things like he's squinting because of the sun, his feet are hot. And so you change the attitude of his walk, and the audience picks it up subconsciously that Jar Jar's in a different kind of a space. He's walking with shorter steps. Imagine if you're at the beach with hot sand on your feet, you walk in a much different way than if you're walking in a nice, cool forest.
Moisture farms, for the most part. Some indigenous tribes.
This is the longest character shot in the movie. We've got Jar Jar, but we've also got the bantha in the background. And as we pan across, you'll see a group of rats, Tyrell characters, all standing back there. Some of them actually have cameras in their hands, pretended that they were a little group coming into town to watch the race the next day. There's a little rolling droid that's going to come in the bottom of screen left. It's also in there, and there was also a speeder added in. I believe that yellow speeder was added in.
This is a really, really great shot. We shot this on a crane, but we only built the buildings about the same height as Liam was. So the domes and everything that you see behind them right now are all painted in. We have a huge painting that extends the set into the far background, but we've added clever use of miniatures in the foreground pieces. It uses every single technique known to filmmakers.
Now we're in Watto's, and Watto was one of our favorite characters to animate. He's just such a great design, and we did torture us sort of over how could he fly with that big belly, but once we bought into it, I think he's one of the most successful characters that we animated in the movie. A lot of what I do before we began animation was to sit with George for hours and ask him probably thousands of questions. Things like, is Watto from Tatooine? Because if he is from Tatooine, then he's used to the heat. You imagine if he isn't from Tatooine, he might be wiping his brow all the time because he'd be perspiring. Has he ever seen a Jedi before? Well, clearly he has seen a Jedi before because of what he says in the dialogue, but we don't know that at the start. So there may be a little bit of attitude that he would have in his head or in his delivery of his line that would give us an indication of what kind of a customer he is.
I listen to all the traders and star pilots who come through here. I'm a pilot, you know, and someday I'm gonna fly away from this place.
You're a pilot?
Mm-hmm. All my life.
How long have you been here?
Since I was very little.
This was a particularly difficult scene for Jake. He never liked it. He never wanted to do it. But it actually is the sequence that we used as the audition scene for all of the young actors that we used. So this is the one that we actually used to choose Jake in the first place.
I don't fully understand. This is a strange place to me.
I think Tunisia was great, but once we went to Tatooine, the actual place Tatooine, if there's anything worse than just regular hot heat, humid heat, hate it. There's nothing worse than that. But you kind of grow immune to it if you live there for over 200 years.
When we finally got back from shooting, this was the sequence that Rob Coleman, our animation director, had been working on so hard, and nothing was coming through. I mean, just the wings didn't work, the texture of Watto's skin, his beard, his clothing, nothing seemed to work for about 6 weeks. And then finally, Rob called us down and we came rushing into the screening room, and he said, I think you'll be happy with this. And this was the first shot that we saw Watto come alive. And of course, it was just awesome.
What's in the background there, John?
It's a 2001 pod that Liam just walked past.
And no one else has it.
The junkyard's been extended in the background of all these shots with matte paintings. Originally, there was a big stack of boxes right behind them that sort of formed a wall, but George felt that was a little too closed in. So we made it look like there was a vast junkyard back then.
This is really the first act of a 3-act play, just as the other trilogy worked. And one of the most important parts of this first act is to set up the main plots. There's endless discussion and work on how floppy his ears would be and how much they would flow around, and that's probably the most extreme, but I think they give him a lot of character, have him fly around like that.
I didn't realize that Watto was going to be sort of this sympathetic character at first. I mean, George had described him as a character being just kind of a odd-looking, shifty character. And that was the personality that I gave him in terms of, designing his features. And it was only later when the script was delivered that George gave him all these layers of depth of, sympathy and caring for Anakin.
Many of the CG characters in the picture have various little secondary animation simulation aspects to them.
You can see the interaction of clothing in his ears, which makes the characters in this movie, I think, more successful than our previous films, because you get that secondary motion of the fabric and his ears on his body that make it look like he's more real than what we were able to achieve before.
Hey, you want a longer?
The actors in the film that had to speak Huttese were given some lessons, basically. I wrote the lines out, translating them from English from the script that George had written. And then I recorded my own voice saying the lines and then sent an audio cassette to each one of the actors ahead of time so they could hear what the Huttese sounded like and they could rehearse and get comfortable with it. So when they performed the scenes, they would have that sound in mind.
Hi.
Hi there.
Your buddy here was about to be turned into orange goo. He picked a fight with a Doug, an especially dangerous...
There's little subtle things we do in animation, too. Check out what happens with the wind on Liam. You'll see a little puff of wind hit Liam in the hair, and we actually match that in Jar Jar and actually have his ears reacting to the same wind puff as it goes. Subconsciously, you would not ever notice that, but you might notice if it wasn't there. So we do pay that kind of attention to scenes when we're animating.
Storm will slow them down. Looks pretty bad. Onaka, receiving a message from home. Be right there.
The little beep of Panaka's radio device on his belt is actually a sonic ray pistol from the 1950s. I owned one as a kid, and I loved the sound of that buzzer. And I used it in the original Star Wars for the sound of the restraining bolts on the robots in the Sandcrawler. And I just couldn't help myself, but I usually find a place for it in each movie, and it was used in this case for the radio beeping of Panaka's communicator.
You'll never reach the outskirts in time. Sandstorms are very, very dangerous. Come on, I'll take you to my place.
This, in a way, is very similar in style to the original Homestead in the first film. We're back on Tatooine, and this relates to a type of architecture in Tunisia, sort of grain stores, kazars. And in theory, the shape of these interiors are related directly to the exterior views of those for which we shot where we shot the exteriors in Tunisia. And obviously we couldn't do the interiors there. The size and space was just too restricting out there, especially on the sort of intimate scenes that took place. So it's very much in a style of a mixture of old style architecture and modern technology, as we've seen before in the Star Wars. And George was quite keen that this did have quite a sympathetic feel in terms of the other film, the original film when they were on Tatooine, because we are only 30, 40 years earlier, and presumably to give the audience that sort of familiarity of the two. And it is Anakin's home, so there's no reason why it shouldn't have that same feel.
No human-cyborg relations. How might I serve you?
He's perfect.
Oh, perfect.
When the storm is over, I'll show you my racer. I'm building a pod racer.
I'm not...
To execute the scene, we had built a puppet of C-3PO, full size, as you see there, that could be attached to the front of a performer.
R2-D2. A pleasure to meet you. I am C.
We had decided that it made more sense to build him as a full-size puppet than as a computer graphic model because, as you can see, it's really complicated. There's lots and lots of these thin little wires, and you can see deep down into the structure of him. So it would be a really, really complicated, heavy, expensive model to build.
Catastrophic. We must bow to their wishes. You must contact me.
Amongst all these all the other things going on. One of the key elements is you got to always keep the bad guys in the picture, whether the Nemoidians are actually there or whether you're hearing from Sol Bibble that they're killing all the people, but you got to keep that threat alive. And not only do I have the bad guy Nemoidian Trade Federation threat of them taking over the planet, but then I've got this larger picture of Darth Sidious, who I felt compelled to actually introduce in the flesh on this picture, and Darth Maul, who is ultimately the main antagonist in the movie at this, and where all the climactic scenes come out of.
You will then have no difficulty in taking the Queen to Naboo to sign the treaty.
At last we will reveal ourselves to the Jedi. At last we will.
And he doesn't have to be the aggressor. He doesn't have to show like his aggression to be the bad guy. Nothing scares him.
All slaves have a transmitter placed inside their body somewhere.
I've been working on a scanner to try and locate mine.
Any attempt to escape,
And they blow you up.
In this sequence here, we used a lot of what Ahmed had come up with on the day. All the gags of when he was drinking and when he was reacting to the characters. He'd come up with this great sound effect on when he was doing the slurping up of the fruit, which later cracked the entire crew up. And his acting when the next couple of shots, when Liam actually grabs his tongue, I think they ruined more than a couple of takes because everyone broke out laughing afterwards because of Ahmed's pantomime.
It took us a very long day to shoot this scene. It was very arduous work, but I was very pleased with the way it turned out.
You're a Jedi Knight, aren't you?
What makes you think that?
The dinner scene was my favorite. None of us could stop laughing when Ahmed did his whole routine with the grapes. And once Qui-Gon cut his tongue, all of us just sat there for a moment and laughed. We couldn't stop. It was really fun.
No, I'm afraid not.
I think you have. Why else would you be here?
This scene, the obvious effect is Jar Jar, but there's quite a lot more that you don't see. There are a lot of shots where there's various splits going on. Places where head turns are changed a little bit, where eye blinks are taken out, where two actors that are together in a shot are from different takes.
I believe you can. But first we must acquire the parts we need.
With not moolah to trade.
These junk
For every Jar Jar shot in the movie, we had Ahmed Best wearing a Jar Jar suit, which basically went up to his neck, and then he had a little Jar Jar hat on. We would shoot reference of Ahmed with Liam or any of the other actors to get that interaction. The original thought was that we could use some of those suit shots and just put on a digital head and ears. But that proved to be difficult for many reasons. One was that Jar Jar's shoulders and neck are quite different than Ahmed's. Ahmed's quite a muscular guy, and Jar Jar's quite slender through the shoulders. So we weren't able to do that. But the suit was still valuable because we could get great lighting reference off of it.
There are a couple of shots where Ahmed in the suit is actually what you see in the shot. Like that first shot in Watto's shop of Jar Jar walking through frame juggling. It's framed below his neck, so that's actually Ahmed in the suit. So I felt justified in asking for them to build the suit because we did end up using it in a number of shots.
Oh, yeah. I think it was used in like 15 or so shots in the movie.
I'm sure Qui-Gon doesn't want to put your son in danger. We'll find some other way.
No, there is no other way. I may not like it, but he can help you. He was meant to help you.
Are you sure?
This was very difficult to shoot too because it was so darn hot out there when we shot this stuff. It was like 135 degrees. And everybody on the crew and everybody was melting.
In Tunisia, we tried frying an egg on R2's head. It was a sunny side up. If we would have left it out there for about 5 more minutes, it would have been done. It was this close.
The interiors were shot in London, where it was extremely cold. So they walk off a location that was 135, 140 degrees onto a set that was probably about 35 degrees. So everybody on the set was freezing.
That you did, huh? The boy's good, no doubts there, huh?
Well, I have acquired a pod in a game of.
When George first described Watto, he was actually very specific. I remember he came in one day and he said that he had a new character, and his name was Watto, and he wanted to use an old Nemoidian head design. And he described Watto verbatim. He basically said Watto should look like this portrait. I want him on a really kind of a funky, fat body, put on really tiny wings, and add duck feet. And at first, there was sort of the weird imagery that didn't quite make sense, but when we actually drew exactly what he described, it worked really well.
Either way, you win.
Deal.
The reason we believe in Watto is because of the weird juxtaposition of all the unusual traits. George is the genius of combining weird animal traits. And I think we believe it because just the fact that you wouldn't ever see a creature like this, and the fact that all these different features are imbued into this one character, you somehow accept that reality, kind of the overall image. The overall impression that we get of Watto is that he kind of works.
Isn't going to get us anywhere. And first off, it's an extraordinary story. It's the first story in the Star Wars cycle, and it's a great adventure story. And that's what I saw first when I read it. I saw the photographs and the descriptions of these extraordinary planets and worlds that my character and various other characters explore. Second or third reading, it was like these races of creatures and individuals and human puppets. They all depend on each other here. George is making a very, very strong point through entertainment that life needs each other. You know what I mean? It's like, a tree needs the ground it grows on. The ground then needs man to kind of look after it. And that point comes across,
It's just clear. Who was his father?
There's one of these close-ups of Liam coming up in a few shots that George changed the line of dialogue and we had to match in a close-up. And I think it's pretty seamless.
So this was shot in Tunisia.
This shot here, I think, was shot in London a year later, and we matched it in.
I think if Liam knew that, he would probably not want to go to Tunisia again. If he could make it look that good in London.
Wow, a real astral droid. How do you get so lucky? That isn't the half of it. I'm in the Boons race tomorrow. What? With this?
Oh, no, you're okay.
The girl in the back row of these children in the grayish smock is Katie Lucas, George's daughter.
Let's go and play ball. Keep racing, Annie. You're going to be bug squat. Hey, Jar Jar. Keep away from those energy binders. If your hand gets caught in the beam, it's going to go numb for hours.
Okay. My tongue is fat. My tongue rabbit.
It's a fun bit of animation here when Jar Jar gets zapped. I was initially worried of how we were going to get this to work, but then was very happy once we got into it.
Once we got the character going, then between my ideas and the animators taking those ideas and making more of them, sometimes than they probably should have, it is really what created the humor of Jar Jar.
Come on, kids, let's move away.
My marriage. I'm stuck. My tongue is rabbit.
You're quite right.
Puppeteer is being painted out of these shots as well. So even though it's in the very background, there's someone manipulating them. You can imagine someone painting through all those little holes through the wires and making the sand come through. Amazing work.
Stay still, Lily. Let me clean this cut.
There's so many. Do they all have a system of planets?
Most of them.
A lot of the concepts in Star Wars are very hard to really go into in a simple way because they're far too complex in the end.
Ow!
There we are.
Yeah, I put him out there as a very superficial thing. It's really, you'd have to really start pulling it apart and to spend a lot of time to get to the bottom of what's really going on, especially in terms of the thematic issues that are involved in most of this. This part is the part that gives us a little bit more breadth to the movie and characters, especially that of Anakin.
The reading is off the chart. Over 20,000.
Master Yoda doesn't have a midichlorian count that high.
No Jedi has.
What does that mean?
I'm not sure.
This little area where we were shooting was about 30 miles out into the desert. And the first night we were there, it rained like you have never seen before. The wind had picked up so hard that it actually had created a small tornado. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, the production manager and I, David Brown and Peter Heslop and I, tried to drive out to the set. We got stuck in our Jeep about a quarter of a way to the set. We couldn't get any communication out with our security guards. And we actually had to walk back. We arrived back at the hotel at about 4:30 in the morning, got a transport vehicle that we knew that could basically get us out. And we went out and we saw nothing but total devastation. I mean, virtually every single thing was destroyed except for one ramp.
I have a friend named Robert Hollis, and he's noted for his funny, almost goofy laugh. And I recorded him, and we dubbed it in the streets of Mos Eisley in a few places. And so those of us that know Robert Hollis get an additional laugh when we hear his laugh in the streets.
The spaceship, the moment the race is over.
Patience, my blue friend. You'll have your winnings before the sun's set. We'll be far away from here.
Not if your ship belongs to me, I think, huh? I warn you. North.
I was always very interested in the classic sound effects of cinema. And the Star Wars films, of course, have many opportunities for electronic sounds to occur, such as sparks and zaps and bolts of lightning and laser bolts. And a lot of that material I actually recorded many years ago. You may remember that in the classic Frankenstein movies done 60 years ago, there was all this fabulous laboratory equipment in Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory. I did some research years ago that all of those props were built by a man named Ken Strickfaden. And he had a traveling science show in the United States way back in the 1920s. He went around demonstrating all these fabulous devices he had built to show off electricity and magnetism. Well, Universal, I guess, hired him to build the props for Frankenstein. And it turns out that he was still living back during the time of Empire Strikes Back. And I went to his house and visited him in the hopes of recording some of his devices. And lo and behold, he had all of them there in his garage. And he hadn't been to the movies for about 10 or 15 years at that point. At first, he didn't want me to record any of his devices. For some reason, he was a bit protective about it and wasn't very friendly. But I was persistent. I invited him down to the Academy to see a 70-millimeter print of Empire Strikes Back that I had to check by myself in the theater. So he and I sat alone in the theater, and he saw The Empire Strikes Back. And I can remember seeing him silhouetted against the screen, and he just loved the movie. He hadn't seen anything like it in his life, and he was probably 85 years old at that point. And I drove him home, and he said, come on in the back, Ben. And he turned on all of his Frankenstein devices, and the place lit up with sparks and bolts flying back and forth. And I stayed at his house overnight and spent part of the next day recording all of his devices. And a lot of that machinery provided raw material, which I've used many times over. And I still discover new things in those recordings, which apply to the Star Wars sound design.
You've never won a race?
Well, not exactly.
Not even finished?
Kitster's right. I will this time.
Of course you will.
At one time, there were a number of scenes of the probe droid that was tracking down Anakin's movements. But it's very typical in the Star Wars films and the way that George Lucas works is a character or a story thread will get developed, and later on that element has to be reduced, but it isn't normally tossed out entirely. It still will find its way into the frame or into the soundtrack somehow.
This was a scene that I'd always wanted to do, which is a large sort of epic production number with thousands of extras, lots of different kinds of vehicles, big scope, but it was not within my grasp on the first 3 movies. And so this was a little bit of an indulgence to be able to take the kind of action that we did in outer space, which was not that hard, and put it into a real environment, especially with alien creatures and strange vehicles.
It's not like this is just enormous. I mean, I can't even tell you. It's probably like 6 weeks to 12 weeks to actually animate a shot like this, and yet you can't hardly see anything in there. But we've got, 4 banthas and a bunch of Eopes and 100, human beings walking around and a bunch of the pod race drivers, and it's incredible.
And back again, it's the mighty Doug Vogt with that incredible racing machine, the Voltmarine 327. And hoping for a big win today, Odie Manziel with his record-setting pit droid team. And a late entry, young Anakin Skywalker, a local boy. I see the flags are...
I'm like, that's my pod? I almost sat in it backwards. The whole engine thing in front, that would be kind of hard to deal with for me because of having it stuck in front of me instead of behind me to where I can't see him. I'd rather have him behind me to where I can't see him and have a little droid like Luke gets. How come I don't get it the easy way? How come he gets the easy way?
I promise.
Uh-oh. Estaba junta shag.
This leads us into one of our other favorite characters, Sebulba. He was fascinating from the start, from the design phase, because he walks on his hands. Here's an example of the clothing software helping us with what we call the jangly bits, or the dangling parts on Sebulba. They really help make this character come alive. I love how he plays with his whiskers, and then he plays with his goggles.
Feel. Don't think. Use your instincts.
I will.
May the Force be with you.
Oh, grandiolous! I'm into top arena. Shabaduhat.
The announcer's booth is a quarter scale miniature with CG characters in there.
And the return of Jabba the Hutt. Computer generated, of course, inside a miniature background.
Jabba's aide there on the right is Matt Wood with the sound aid.
Hey, looks like...
One of their little rat crews running away. So even in these wide shots, we're doing digital creatures and digital extras to help fill out the scene.
Stadium miniature is about 40 feet across. And in shots like this, some of the people that are in the background are Q-tips that were part of the miniature, and we just replaced the ones where you could see them clearly enough that you could see that they were Q-tips. We replaced those with CG people, and in some cases, rows of generic people that we shot on high 8.
There were a lot of challenges with this race because of the fact I wanted these things to really go fast. And I wanted to play with the exaggeration of the various engine sizes and the visceral thrill of racing with the sound and the fury of it all. And this is a expression of the fact that I always wanted to do a race movie. This is my chance to do a little 20-minute version of a race movie.
It's gonna be messy. We are watching.
Doug Chang and I are two of the people in that starting light up top.
Oh, wait, little Skywalker has stalled. Super. Looks like Quadraneros is having.
And there's so little of this that's real, which is one of the unique things about it. Apart from Anakin sitting in his pod and his family and friends standing in the little observation tower, there isn't anything else in here that's actual. It's all digital. All the characters, all the environments, the stadium, Jar Jar, pods.
As the pod race got faster and faster, it became more and more difficult to articulate the sounds of the different racers, because if sound was there for just a fraction of a second, and there wasn't enough sound there for the ear to hear a racer coming from a distance and passing camera and going by. Your eye was able to pick up that information very quickly in a quick cut, but it doesn't work that way with sound. And the more picture cuts there are, therefore the sound designer has to think up more ways of orchestrating the sound to work in tandem with the picture changes.
We're going through a canyon here, and the entire canyon kind of has to be built, and you have to be able to go through it. And by doing it digitally, we were able to go long distances. It's very difficult to do on a miniature. You have to build it a quarter of a mile long.
We did use miniatures in a few places. Jag Crag, this big curved cave with the open top there, is a miniature. Parts of the canyon are a miniature. The stadium's a miniature.
Looks like a few.
Yeah, this was also kind of a little fun being able to add the Tusken Raiders and the Jawas back into the film, sort of touch on them a little bit. I always try to get a little element of the exotic into the movies in terms of you don't quite know what's going on and explain everything. In the case of pit crews and, the power beams that hold them together and all these kind of things as binders. It's all worked out about what the rules are and how they work and everything, but we never explain it. We just sort of live by the rules we created. Originally, this race was 4 laps. Ben and I worked on it for, about 9 months, and it was just, in the beginning, it was way, way too long. It was about 40 minutes long. And kept trimming it back until we got to the bare essentials of what we thought an audience would tolerate. One of my favorite shots is when Jabba flicks those little Nunas off the edge. It's a very small moment, but it's one of those little bits of humor that come to you when you're working on this film late at night with a bunch of goofy animators and stuff. There's more than once or twice that I've suggested things and nobody would believe me that I was actually wanting to do that. The case of the Nunas was one of those. They were fortunate to be able to add a little bit back to the second lap here, add some things in. Anakin spinning his pod and that sort of thing, which I think make the whole thing more exciting, but it's just, at some point you have to say a sequence is too long and it has to be trimmed. That's the great thing about DVD and alternate venues, is that you can actually have the version you always wanted, but were never able to get because you don't have a place to show it that people will tolerate. This revised lap 2, we added a little bit of the footage back that we'd taken out. Again, it was a matter of how long would people tolerate this race, but by having these extra added little features in here, it gives Anakin a chance to really get to see him overcome more obstacles and show his expertise as a driver, which isn't crucial because we have a little bit of that, but this, I think, broadens it quite a bit, especially in this sequence where the pod blows up in front of him and knocks one of his engine cables off and he has to replace it. It does show him cool and calm in the face of danger and a little bit of portent of what he is going to become as an adult.
Well, originally, we were going to just do the big trails of dust just in the big flats area, this big straightaway before the stadium. But I really liked how they were looking, so we ended up putting these dust trails in pretty much everywhere. And I think it does add a lot to the feeling of speed.
We wanted certain sounds associated with certain racers. We wanted the audience to be able to identify Anakin's racer as opposed to Sebulba's racer.
It's at the start of the third lap. Sebulba's closely by Skywalker.
For instance, Anakin's racer is basically very high-pitched, and Sebulba's racer is very low-pitched. Sebulba's racer has a pulsing sound. So everything was done to try to articulate and differentiate the different sounds from one another. So when you put it all together, it wouldn't just become a big blur of sound.
Skywalker's been forced onto the service ramp.
So a couple of these shots, when we're zipping along, we actually put a computer-generated Anakin in there. We had the live-action element, of course, of Jake looking around, and so we had that as reference. And to get it to look right in the long shot, we decided to go for CG.
One of the also fun things about this race is we decided to not bring music in until the very end here, where Anakin really gets in trouble, but to do most of it just with sound effects made Ben very happy. There's enough noise in this to make it almost a musical number, and a lot of it was treated like a musical number. And I like car sounds, so for me it's music.
The two Jawas here are my older daughters, Sarah and Lisa.
I don't think I've had a sequence quite like the pod race before. We've had, in the original Star Wars, of course, we had the dive and skim on the Death Star, which was a sound effects only sequence. It's the first time I ever faced that issue of trying to really build up a whole dramatic sequence with basically just sound effects. In Return of the Jedi, we had the speeder bike chase through the forest, which is a few minutes of just speeder bike sounds going through the forest. Really, they're probably the thing that I'm the most proud of in each of the films because they really get a chance to exercise your sonic imagination.
It's catching Sebulba! Inga boonga! Careful, Andy! Careful, Andy!
There are a number of explosions and crashes that take place in this scene, and how to deal with making these pods explode was a difficult problem. Now, my first thought was to build miniatures of them and blow them up, but as I started working out in detail how that would have to work, what sort of frame rate we would have to run it, how many different angles we would need to see each explosion, how much miniature we would need to build to crash the model into, it became apparent that logistically it was extremely difficult. So that left us again with, well, can we do this with computer graphics? And really blowing up these pods in a way that looked realistic. It's an enormous challenge. George didn't want pods that just blew up. He didn't want your standard movie explosion where something, the car hits the wall and it just turns into a big orange fireball. He had seen all these Formula One car crashes where they go to great pains to make sure that the body of the car absorbs the energy and the driver survives. So when you see a Formula One crash, mostly what you see are all these parts shredding off and the thing tumbling end over end and just pieces go everywhere. But there's very little fire because they're trying really hard to make sure there isn't fire. And George really liked that look and that energy, and he wanted the pods to have that.
Oh!
There was just desert behind all of our dancing, waving characters. So this is one of the hardest roto jobs in the whole film.
The joke where Viv Fortuna wakes up Jabba the Hutt because he slept through the whole race. That was something that sort of came out of ILM.
We owe you everything, Anne.
This is the kind of sequence where you can actually turn the sound off and pretty much follow the story. Understand that the film is really working as an exercise in moving images more than it is, the dialogue or the more traditional ways of telling a story. All the Star Wars films are really based on the theory and practice of silent movies, and they're designed to be silent movies. It's basically visual storytelling with a musical, emotional underpinning, and that's the way they work. A lot of the dialogue is really more lyrics to a song than actual dialogue that you'd normally see in a movie.
A few weeks before principal photography, I spent 4 days in various places in Utah with a still camera shooting textures from Monument Valley and Arches National Park. And a lot of those photographic textures that I took are in the background of these shots. The big mesas in the background of Hutt Flats came from Monument Valley.
Hey, Doc. Well, we have all the essential parts we need. I'm going back. I'm unfinished business. It won't be long.
Why do I sense we've picked up another pathetic life form?
It's the boy who's responsible for getting us these parts.
There was always an issue here about, how much do we believe that an 8-year-old boy could do this? And so the more things I gave him, the more we stretched that point. I think part of it made us a little nervous in terms of what was going to be believable to an audience, which may sound odd in a movie like this. But credibility and realism, even in the most unrealistic situation, sort of create that sense of realism is very important to making the story work and making you feel like you're actually in the environment. It transports you and gives you the suspension of disbelief that you need in order to enjoy a movie. Kurosawa used to call it immaculate realism, which is to make it slightly off-kilter, slightly eccentric, like things are in real life. Even if it's a very predictable situation, give it that little funny edge that takes it away from that and makes it realistic. And I had to struggle very hard on the Star Wars films to make them appear to be realistic, even though they're totally fantasy. And they, aren't science fiction, they're fantasy, so that they're not even based on scientific principle, yet you still believe that this could actually happen. The pod race is a very good example because, the physics of this are completely impossible. But by constructing it in a way with the power binders holding the engines together and the kind of things that we did, it appears that it could be possible, even though if you really studied it, it's not. But it has the appearance of reality. And that's always a challenge in these kind of movies. So how far can you go before you become incredible?
What about Mom?
This little scene was in, and then it was taken out, and then it was put back in again. We realized that the race had gotten so intense that you really needed a little decompression space before you got back into the movie as a whole. And as much as I like to move things along, I respect the fact that occasionally, if you have a big action sequence or something, or a scene that's extremely emotional, you really do need to have a little respite, a little period of contemplation after that scene for the audience to gather up their wits and get back into what's going on in the movie. It's very dangerous to put a very important piece of information after a sequence that is very emotion charged, like an action sequence or a death of somebody or something that kind of knocks people for an emotional loop. It's important to put important exposition away from those kinds of scenes. Otherwise, people will never get it.
You have my word. Will you be all right?
There's a very thin line there between making everybody strong and noble and having everybody come unglued and be crying and sobbing all over the set.
Master Anakin, you are my maker, and I wish you well. However, I should prefer it if I were a little more completed.
I'm sorry I wasn't able to finish you, 3PO. Give you coverings and all. I'm gonna miss working on you. You've been a great pal. I'll make sure Mom doesn't sell you or anything.
Tell me.
Bye.
Oh, my.
The series of scenes when Anakin comes home to see his mother, there's a fair amount of time spent here setting up his leaving, which is important really to his character, not necessarily in this picture, but in all the other pictures. So I had to stop moving the plot forward a little bit here and spend time with Anakin coming to the realization that he was going to be off on his own and he was going to not be with his mother anymore. Trying to balance his enthusiasm for wanting to leave home with the reality of, understand that it's difficult for both of them, but not hit it too hard.
I hope so. Yes. I guess.
Then we will see each other again.
Anakin just thinks of the Jedi as being like a god, basically. But the Jedi mostly are the protectors that he needs. He needs them to free his friends and him. So Anakin really looks up to them. He really hopes that they'll come and rescue him, which they do, and so that's like a dream.
This scene of the probe droid reporting back to Darth Maul posed a couple of difficult challenges. One of them is that we didn't have a full-size prop of the speeder that he hops onto, so that's computer graphics there. And then that's a CG Darth Maul. And this shot had the camera dolly that photographed the plate was visible on the bottom and had to be very painstakingly removed.
Tell them to take off!
Another scene I worked on in the pre-visualization was the first encounter between Darth Maul and Qui-Gon in the desert when they met at the tips of lightsabers in the desert. This was the first time that Darth Maul was going to be in combat, and so there was a lot of discussion as to how acrobatic they would be, whether they would fight in the air or leap into the air on top of one another. But for time reasons, that sequence was shortened a great deal. I think the idea of the flying swordsman was a good one, but one has to be aware that this film is a prequel to the other Star Wars adventures, and if one introduces a new element that departs radically in style or in plausibility from the kind of element that will reoccur in the subsequent films, then you have to drop that idea if it's inconsistent with how the Jedi behaved in the later films, so that the style of fighting has to progress and connect naturally, as so many other threads need to, between the original 3 Star Wars films and these prequels. And in the design of the films and in the sound as well, one has to be aware of those connecting threads and not to really be inconsistent about it.
Democracy. The people have decided. Hug him away.
My troops are in position to begin searching the swamps for these rumored underwater villages. They will not stay hidden for long.
We have to keep the plot moving with these little scenes of the Neimoidians, just to make sure you know what the threat is. Because ultimately what everybody's trying to get back to is to save the planet of Naboo and the people. So we have, the bad guys threatening the good guys, and the Queen here watching the hologram of Bibble saying that people are being killed, and the weight of that on Padme is put together with a scene of Anakin being lonely and missing his mother.
So one of the things that we had to do was create the hologram look, and we used the original Star Wars as a guide because George wanted to keep the same type of technology. So we wanted to keep a similar type of look and quality level to these as in the original, just to keep a consistency there. So for the holograms, Cybele was shot against black, which made it a little bit difficult since he was wearing dark clothing. A few of the hologram people were shot against blue screen or green screen. And so when he was shot against black, we'd end up rotoscoping, which is basically cutting him out. And then we would run a special filter process on him to look like he'd gone through video and distort him as such to make it look like he's turning off or breaking up due to the video static.
Many things will change when we reach the capital, Annie. But my caring for you will remain. I care for you too. Only I miss your mother.
Coruscant. The entire planet is one big city. There's Chancellor Valorum's shuttle. And look over there. Senator Palpatine is waiting for us.
Very complex 3D matte paintings here. Done almost entirely by Yusei Wesky, one of our great matte painters.
Even though, let's say, elaborate matte paintings are on screen for only 5 seconds or less, each element in there has to have a reason for being and a reason for why it looks the way it is. The 3 main environments that we were designing were on the planet of Naboo, which is the Queen's planet, Tatooine, and Coruscant. And the main problem for these 3 worlds was George wanted to make sure that when we're cutting back and forth, we realized very quickly that we're in a different environment.
May I present Supreme Chancellor Valorum?
Welcome, Your Highness. In addition to that, each planet had to look very different in that, we were on, let's say on Coruscant, we were on one part of the city planet, and then in another scene, we're in another part. And so even on a sort of global planetary scale, we need elements that can distinguish certain parts of the city from another. And so those were all really important elements. And some of the issues that we solved were, trying to design buildings that can convey the monumental scales that George was looking for. Yet we're distinct enough so that when we cut back to, say, the Jedi Temple, it looked very distinct.
Annie, come on.
The queens are being grossly nice, Mr. Things. Pretty hot.
Coruscant itself was a planet of city. It's kind of Manhattan on a global scale. It was a carpet of buildings, thousands of feet tall, miles tall. So that contrasted it with Naboo, which was more of a rural society where you have sort of Italian villa type architecture, things a little more palatial. You have a lot of fauna and so forth, waterfall and animal life.
Only politics.
The Republic is not what it once was. The Senate is full of greedy, squabbling delegates.
There is no interest.
These films are things that remain for so long. I mean, hopefully this will have the same impact as the first films did. I also think it's really great to be playing, a young queen with so much power, having a young girl with so much power.
Mired by baseless accusations of corruption. The bureaucrats are in charge now.
What options have we?
Our best choice would be to push for the election of a stronger Supreme Chancellor, one who could control the bureaucrats.
I kind of practice, walking around and stuff in my bedroom, trying to get something a little regal. And then, I worked with a dialect coach to get a voice for the queen.
I think she's melancholy in the fact that she knows underneath that the system is corrupt enough not to get her what she needs, which is her planet back.
Quickly to stop the Federation.
To be realistic, Your Majesty, I think we're going to have to accept Federation control for the time being.
That is something I cannot do.
That is one of the thematic plot lines that's moving through this whole thing, is turning the Republic into an empire.
The conclusion can be that it was a Sith Lord.
Impossible. The Sith have been extinct for a millennium.
I do not believe the Sith could have returned without us knowing.
Hard to see the dark side is.
We will use all our resources to unravel this mystery. We will discover the identity of your attacker. May the Force be with you.
It was only after the second or third reading that I became aware of that whole environmental issue. In fact, my character makes a statement to this little boy who becomes my apprentice about bacteria in our own bodies. There's like 10 or 20 strains of bacteria in all our bodies that we wouldn't live unless we had them. And yet, if we saw them under a microscope, we'd see these kind of nasty little bug-like things that your instant reaction would be to kill it. But that is life, you know? And George has hinted at that one of those bacteria is in touch with force. That's what makes certain individuals more sensitive to the ether and to God or to Buddha than other people, you know? And it's about harmony, I guess, but told in a wonderful, entertaining, as I say, way, and full of action and full of a very, very interesting basic philosophy that we all need to be reminded of.
Bring him before us, then.
Boys here to see Padme.
Let him in.
This went through quite a few changes in terms of ideas. Initially, it was a very light-coloured set, but we did make suggestions that it could have a slightly more mysterious, sort of darker feel to it. So we've come up with this rather sort of rich, sort of red and sort of burgundy rouge colour. And in the end, I think it works very well in connection with the other sets that we see in Coruscant. But it was quite an exercise to get this colour to work. Red is quite a difficult colour.
The traffic that you're seeing out there is from our stock library of strings of traffic.
The chair recognizes the senator from the sovereign system of Naboo.
Supreme Chancellor, delegates of the Senate. A tragedy has occurred.
Which started right...
So the entire Senate sequence, they only had one of these, what we called pods or landing platforms. And then they had the top section of the tower. Everything else was added in later. And part of the problem was they'd done camera moves on them, but what George wanted later might be a totally different type of maneuver. So in many cases, we ended up having to replace the platform that they're on. All the background platforms had people in it, so we set up 3 digital video cameras at different angles, photographing people in different costumes, and we would rotate them around to different angles. And then one of the people in our crew wrote a special script that placed their images in the correct places around the entire Senate area.
Congress of Menace concurs with the honorable delegate from the Trade Federation. A commission must be appointed.
The point?
Excuse me, Chancellor.
Enter the bureaucrats, the true rulers of the Republic, and on the payroll of the Trade Federation, I might add. This is where Chancellor Valorum's strength will disappear.
The point is conceded.
This is the first time we really get a chance to see Palpatine as the senator from Naboo. So it's a very important moment where they have a discussion about the failings of the political system in the Republic.
Suffer and die while you discuss this invasion in a committee.
I worked on kind of accent for the Queen, but George didn't like it, so got rid of that. But I do have to speak in like a different voice, which is hard because I have to be kind of deep, and I have a tendency to want to like speak up here, you know, and that's the worst.
The E.T. shot's coming up here in a second. E.T.'s family is in the lower pod.
Now they will elect a new chancellor. A strong chancellor. One who will not let our tragedy continue.
She does make this very difficult decision in this scene, to confront the issue and not stand by and watch things transpire, which is exactly what Palpatine wants.
Do not defy the Council, Master, not again.
I shall do what I must, Obi-Wan.
This was a bit of a tricky shot because we've got a very large pan and camera crane and had very little off the background to work with. So we had to track their motion, add in the lens flare, and add in the full digital background that we see behind them, and trying to get it all to match the correct motion was proved to be very challenging.
In the overall scheme of the design of the picture with sound, as well as picture, Reel 5, when we go to Coruscant, we return with Anakin to Coruscant, and the whole area leading up to the climactic reel of the movie, Reel 5 is presented as a very quiet reel. We're in Coruscant, we're in apartment buildings, we're in the Senate or Jedi chambers, and every attempt was made here to sort of back off a bit on the sound, to give the audience, in a sense, a respite from all the action, the pod race and everything which has preceded this, and prepare them and lay the foundation for the last reel of the movie, in which you will have 20 minutes of continuous noise and sound effects and explosions and loud music and all of that.
One of the things that you can see evidence of, we went to a lot of trouble to recreate, is this shimmering light effect. We looked at a bunch of footage of LA at night, and the farther off you get into the distance, the more you have this heat shimmer that's visible. The method for determining how out of focus a background should be in these shots is actually fairly simple. Beyond the window, another 20 feet or so, is our blue screen. And we had tracking marks on the blue screen. And so generally I would have the compositors put the matte painting about the same amount of defocus as is visible on those tracking marks. And as a general rule of thumb, that seemed to work pretty well. If you just look at the sharpness of the edge, if it's blurred over a 5-pixel region, then you're applying a 5-pixel defocus on it. But one thing you can see that heat shimmer effect in this scene.
These Jar Jar shots were animated by Bill Bright. These were some of the early on Jar Jar shots we did. As we're getting to know a character, we never want to start at the start of the film. We don't ever want to begin with the first shot that you see a character and make that the first shot we animate, because you learn things as you're animating. We were, of course, animating this movie over about a year and a half, and what we knew a year into it clearly was way more than we knew at the beginning. We knew about the muscles and the clothing and how to handle the ears and everything. So I wanted to pick a sequence where he was acting, but he wasn't doing that much. You've got a number of shots here where he's just really listening, and we were able to figure out the difficulties of the character without really showing our hand. I didn't want us to take on too many difficult shots at the beginning. So this is the sequence we picked to do first. If you look at the human being standing still in the shot, they're moving ever so slightly. Even that woman in the red, you can see her clothes are just moving. If we don't do that in computer graphics, it doesn't look real. And you, the audience, will pick up on it and say something. You may not be able to articulate or put your finger on what's not right about it, but you'll have a gut feeling that something's wrong in the scene. It's also one of the first sequences of, I think John said it was the second day that they shot. So, of course, it was one of the first sections of what we call plates or backgrounds that we received at ILM from the Ranch editorial.
So this combination of miniature, once again, along with the digital matte paintings in the background. So we ended up painting a number of different light passes and adding a certain amount of shimmer in the post-production process of combining the elements just to make them distort correctly.
I will train him then. I take Anakin as my Padawan learner.
An apprentice you have, Qui-Gon. Impossible to take on a second.
The code forbids it.
We have the little testing scene, which is really designed to allow him to be accepted as a Jedi eventually, because he has the powers. But as Yoda points out, there's a lot of fear in him and anger. That's why they actually deny him the chance to become a Jedi. But it's also when they relent later on, it's the thing that ultimately begins to describe some of his downfall.
Put pressure on the Federation and could widen the confrontation.
And draw out the Queen's attacker.
Go with the Queen to Naboo and discover the identity of this dark warrior.
In the Jedi Council, he's one of the wizened people. And I think it's important that you have people that are able to analyze and look at things kind of dispassionately, in a way, that he does. That uses reason, and he has this sense of right and wrong that is finite. You know, there's no cloudy space in there. It's very cut and dry for him.
It's the truth.
From your point of view,
The boy is dangerous. They all sense it. Why can't you?
This sequence was one of the very first massive blue screen sets that we had. All that existed was the ramp and this platform. There was nothing else. There wasn't the spaceship. There wasn't any clue of what was going on in the background and the back sky. And I know it was very tough for the actors this first week to understand where they were and what they were supposed to be doing, how they were supposed to be reacting to everything around them. But once we got through this sequence, I think everybody kind of understood how blue screen acting worked.
and you'll be safe.
Master, sir, I heard Yoda talking about
I just asked what would be there, and then I pictured the cars flying around, the creatures walking around, stuff like that. Actually, you kind of grow immune to it. For the first couple of days, it gets kind of hard, but it gets really easy after a while.
We are symbionts with them.
symbionts.
Life forms living together for mutual advantage. Without the midichlorians, life could not exist, and we would have no knowledge of the Force. They continually speak to us, telling us the will of the Force. When you learn to quiet your mind, you'll hear them speaking to you.
I don't understand.
With time and training, Emmy, you will. You will. Your Majesty, it is our pleasure to continue to serve.
There was a character that was originally in this scene that had to be removed, and we painted that character out pretty successfully in most of the shots here, but that shot had that character over the top of one of the handmaidens, so we had to reshoot a new element of a handmaiden to cover up where we had painted out the other character.
Is the planet secure?
We have taken over the last pockets of primitive life forms. We are in complete control of the planet now.
I thought somehow, having seen this face in the mirror of this person that Nick Dudman had created, that his voice was more reptilian and sort of sepulchral, I mean, dark and deep down. So I just found myself doing that, and anyway, George liked it, and so I ended up with my own voice, and that very deep one that I try and use, which I may get digitally tweaked, but that's me. They say these are my notes, and it's great because that it really is the sort of, I can use the word, the fundament of the character. That's where all his bile comes from, all the way down.
It's really fun. Having a different look completely really helps you with the character because you don't look like yourself anymore. But after like an hour and a half in the makeup chair, I think I'm exaggerating, but I mean, after a really long time in the makeup chair, you just like feel like dying, you know, between the makeup and the hair. And I mean, there's so much makeup just like caked on. I find white like on my neck. Like when we're at a store, someone will be like staring at me and I'll realize I have like white makeup all over my neck. Then I'll feel like a freak. But anyway, it's fun, except when it takes too long and then it gets tiring.
Gungan City Master.
Good.
Do you think the Queen's idea will work?
The Gungans will not be easily swayed. And we cannot...
This is a continuation, really, of the confrontation between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon in terms of the fact that Obi-Wan does not trust Anakin, is not a big fan of Anakin.
And I am grateful you think I'm ready to take the trials.
You've been a good apprentice.
I'm trying to develop the situation where, ironically enough, at the end, it's Obi-Wan who has to train him and take care of him and take over the responsibility that Qui-Gon has started. This is the last chance they have to say goodbye. The rest of the movie, things start going pretty quickly. And I needed that one scene where Qui-Gon does say, "You're a good kid, you're going to go places." And they kind of resolve their differences of this kind of bickering that's been going on through the rest of the movie. You really see that they actually care for each other. Comes, quite a ways before the end of the movie, but it's the last shot we have of doing a scene like that.
When in trouble, Gungans go to sacred place. Mr. Show you. Come on, Mr. Show you.
I used the small Boss Nass team made up of about 5 animators with Hal Hickles, the lead animator, Sue Campbell, Tim Harrington. I believe Ken King worked on these as well. The idea behind having a small team was that you'd have one group of people that could really focus on the performance of this character, and I would point to Boss Nass as one of the examples that worked really well in that case, where you have 5 people who learn the face shapes, the attitude of the character, the backstory of the character, how he moves, how to do the clothing, and our ability then to do a series of shots that are very cohesive, that get a single performance out of 5 people. That's the ongoing challenge. In the background of the shots with Padme, you can see there's a whole bunch of Gungans that are out of focus. We're still animating them because you as the audience would miss them if they weren't there. There'll be birds that fly by. There's, of course, the Caduceus in the foreground here. They're shifting their weight and moving around. The guards are playing with their poles. All of that goes together to make it feel like a crowd of people, both human and Gungan.
It's my decoy, my protection, my loyal bodyguard. I'm sorry for my deception.
As an actor, we've had some scenes where I've had, 2-3 page dialogue scenes with a creature that doesn't exist. As the actor, you have to learn to kind of focus where this thing's going to be. When the camera's on me, it's really hard to learn to focus your eyes on something there without having that sort of blank gaze, Those early special effects films, the actors, and they couldn't help it, they were told, okay, there's a herd of elephants coming at you now. Lift your sword and try and kill them. And, you saw this blank stare. And that was always the giveaway. Those films never worked for me because of that, So we're using various techniques to try and help focus the actor's eyes on nothing, and I find that very, very difficult.
Maybe we saw being friends.
We've sent out patrols.
She has made up her mind, really, to fight. At one point, I did have a scene where she actually articulates that, but I didn't like it being so dead on that she sort of comes to grips with putting her beliefs on one side so that she could actually do what she thought was right, which is save her people, which was a big story point for her. When does she decide to stop being a pacifist and start being an activist and try to save her people? But I felt it was more powerful actually not seeing that scene than having it actually in there. So you see her sort of get her resolve, but you don't actually see her reflect on resolve of deciding to fight. There was also a scene in the movie that was taken out at one point where Jar Jar actually goes down into the empty city and there's nobody there. But it seemed really redundant after he basically tells them that. So we pulled that out. But I designed it so that the Gungans could be on land when the next time we see them, so we wouldn't have to cope with them coming out of the water. And at one point, they did stay under the water and then come out of the water when the battle started. But all in all, it seemed to play better when we established them on land first before we start this battle.
Army away from the cities. R2, we can enter the city using the secret passages on the waterfall side. Once we get to the main entrance, Captain Panaka will create a diversion. Then we can enter the palace and capture the Viceroy.
This is really to establish that we're building up an alliance here of the two armies, and this is one of those pointer scenes where you have to explain what's going to happen in the rest of the movie. It's especially important when you're trying to do an action piece. You have to know where everybody's supposed to be. So when they're not there, you can worry about it. And what the plan is in terms of understanding that one group is going to go after the control ship in order to stop the droids. One group is going to try to capture the leader of the Neimoidians, and the other group is going to act as a decoy, which is the Gungan army, to draw the droids out. And in order for this ending to work, all those points need to be made clear. This is the last third of the movie, the beginning of the last act. And one of the difficulties in this act is that Anakin basically doesn't have much to do except stand around and watch. He does eventually become the hero, but on a practical level, he's just a little boy, and he's not really included in most of what's going on around here.
So here we have another case of the walking chair, so with a hologram above it. So We had to tilt him and rock him back and forth and to try to keep the same motion. So that's all computer graphic, the walking chair itself. Some of those long shots, we could actually see cars in the background from the location, so we had to remove those.
By her basically begging for help, it formed an alliance here, which is one of the main themes in the movie, which is these two different cultures coming together to ward off a threat, because their planet, their environment is the ones being threatened by outside forces. And unless they come together, they'll both lose. And in the beginning, obviously, the Gungans felt that they would be ignored by all of this, and that whatever happened on the surface wasn't their business. But there is a bit of an ecological motif going on here, that all the organisms depend on each other. And when one organism is pulled out of the chain or the circle, it affects all the others. It's really told in the themes of what's actually going on here, which is whatever happens to the people in Naboo eventually will also happen to the Gungans, which is part of also what brings them together. That realization that unless they unite, they're all doomed.
Here we have quite a lot of interaction with the real pyro that was done on the location, along with all of our laser blasts. So we had to choreograph all those positions. But one of the problems was the entire environment wasn't synthetic, so we had to actually match and blend into the real world things, as opposed to sequences where you can just create everything from scratch.
There's quite a few lightsaber fights in it. It's funny when Ewan McGregor and myself, we fight side by side a couple of times against unknown enemies. And the first time we were rehearsing these fights, of course, we started making the sound effects of the lightsabers, like, you know, we kind of looked at each other and thought, okay, we have to stop that, you know. We're like professional actors here.
It's very easy when you're dealing with actors of this caliber. So I'll work on their character. They've got their own idea of how their character is going to fight. Ewan McGregor as Obi will always attack you. He's never going to hesitate, and he's going to enjoy it. You know, there's always a little twinkle in his eye if he's up against droids or aliens.
Once again, you'll see a reflective floor which has all the reflections of the droids and the other actors running. So we had to shoot a number of blue screen people. That's a computer graphic ship going down against the digital background.
So there were some really great animatics done for this space battle, and I was really excited to work on this because there were just thousands of ships flying all over the place, and just some really exciting, neat shots.
This was their big sequence that I was in charge of, and it was just so exciting. I can't tell you how exciting it was to just see the storyboards on this, to have, like 200 shots with, 5,000 Gungan fighting 5,000 droids, and the whole thing being synthetic, and the whole thing being in bright sunlight, and being able to, just make this thing, like a real battle scene for a movie. It was really a great challenge, and it was really tough on everybody to pull it off. But boy, you don't get opportunities like that very often. Just look at the shot here. That's so great. The droids coming out and ready for battle, and that the transport vehicles, everything that needed to be designed in this film. Doug Chang did just a tremendous job, and with probably thousands of different things that had to be designed on the effects end. These are great looking robots too.
Yes, sir.
The faces on them that you can see there, and the way the heads are long, with the long snouts, and you just see they're made to fold up, and then when they open up, they still look really great. And here we tried to get just the right glints off their chests when they turn. You can see it here, these shots, so that they just, they just look really neat in backlight. So I lit this whole thing from behind. The robots lit from the left, Gungans lift from the right, so you could always tell which way you're looking as far as the direction goes. And these are more of the explosive things that were sort of supposedly mined from their underwater kingdom that they could turn into these short circuit plasma balls or whatever they would throw around. And I guess these balls would come in different sizes. That's an impossible shot there. How they would ever manage to survive that, I don't know. But they had their wonderful Gungan shields that kept the blasts away.
I guess the viceroy's in the throne room.
The last shot of that scene we referred to as the Braveheart shot because it's the two armies just merging right into each other.
Stay in that cockpit. We'll handle this.
We'll take the long.
I've always wanted to have an excuse to shave my head, but I'd always think that I would look silly. I was a bit apprehensive at first, but then for like Star Wars and have the part, then anyone would do it. I said, yeah, just do it now. Shave it. I want to do it.
Editorially, it was challenging because you went back and forth sometimes between very dramatic, serious moments, like the appearance of Darth Maul meeting the Jedi for the first time, and that's contrasted with the comedic antics of Jar Jar on the battlefield, and yet you're jumping back and forth within a minute of the film, covering comedy, serious melodrama, and probably everything in between. The sound of Darth Maul's lightsaber had to be a new invention on top of what was already there in the sound folklore of the lightsaber, because Darth Maul had a double-bladed sword and he could twirl it like a baton. Obviously, the sound had to reflect much quicker movements and the fact that there were two blades of the sword at once. I took the basic components that had been developed for the lightsaber and I put it on the keyboard of the synthesizer and was able to, by playing keys in rapid succession, create a much more rapid, articulate swishing motion of the sword and have two different pitches of either end of the sword, slightly different, so they would somewhat form a chord rather than just be a sound doubled up. There'd be more than one sound there that the ear could discriminate.
Sword fighting stuff I've done. I did a lot of at drama school, and I've had to fight in a couple of things since then. Something I'm familiar with, fencing and the different forms of that. However, this is very unique. Fighting the big poles, really. Lightsaber handles, but with a pole. And that makes a difference, and it's got a kind of style of its own, I think. But I think the fighting in this is slightly more aggressive, more ferocious and faster. Really big cuts. And I think they're trying to beef it up a bit from the other movies. So it's been good. It's been quite hard work, but I enjoy it. Once you've got it set, it feels really good when you go through a whole fight without having to worry what's next.
That theme of biology versus physics is a theme that recurs over and over. That you're constantly having this advanced technological society trying to take on. In this case, the Gungans aren't that primitive, but their technology is very different from the one that's based on physics. In most cases, kind of making fun of the technology and the failings and the weaknesses of technology and how it can create kind of absurd situations and absurd characters. The Gungans have a very organic technology, which has to do with some kind of plasma and kinds of things they find at the bottom of the lakes and stuff. I call it electric eel technology. And then you have the droids, which are very mechanical and everything is very technologically oriented. So it's really a battle between biology and physics.
If you look at the space battles in the previous trilogy, they get more complex with each film. And the complexity of putting those together was extremely high. It's difficult and tedious to put them all in there. But the tools we have now make that sort of thing a little easier to do. So we try to do shots that have that same, wow dynamic with hundreds of elements in them that were characterize the best shots in Jedi, and just try and have a lot of those in this picture.
I'll try spinning.
That was strange. It was really strange. Being in a spacecraft, that was just fun. It was just the best. I liked the one that actually moves. The one that goes kind of slow, but it moves. You can, control it. It's really fun.
We found out afterwards in like this hallway sequence that they hadn't photographed any of the backgrounds for the droids. They'd photographed the actors, those angles, but they hadn't photographed anything with the hallway. So we built a miniature hallway to force scale, as it were. And then we also used computer graphics to generate many of those background scenes. These were fairly tricky shots to make look correct given the perspective that they were shot at and some of the designs that we had to deal with. So we had to split each of those people and adjust their timings and speeds, even though they were shot live action originally.
So I knew when I wrote the script that I had this situation where I wanted them to be able to see and get trapped with each other. So I came up with this device of these laser gates, which would allow them to get trapped into this gateway leading to this other kind of reactor. And this is one of those things where you can't have it be too logical. You want to have some mystery about what are these things, how do they work. We know that you can't go through those things. That's all we know. But what is their purpose in the larger scale thing? One of the things about Star Wars is there are always things that are sort of bigger, and there are things that you just don't understand. And you don't really have to understand them, but it keeps a kind of a mystery going in the environment. But there are things that you just, in this environment, that you'll never understand. And that's one of them, in which there are a lot of them. Very rarely do I use it as a plot device like that. But in that particular case, it was the only way I could figure out to separate them and still have them see each other.
Basically, we always felt that they were safety doors of some sort or another.
And we later find that big pit that Darth Maul goes down, so we can presume that it's some kind of air vent or energy vent that allows them to get their energy up from the core of the planet. George could tell you for sure, but I think Scott's right. I think it was seen as some kind of safety barrier for the people.
Yes, Nazi.
To pull off all this animation, these hundreds of characters you're seeing fighting in every shot, we did a series of performances that we did with motion capture for the ones in the background where a person acts out the performance, and we can sort of record with a computer what their motion is, and we can put those motions on any shape we want. So we would apply it to a droid, or we would apply it to a Gungan. And we used the same probably 10 performances for most of the characters in the background. You're seeing those 10 performances over and over again, various parts of them, viewed from different angles. Sometimes different characters fighting, one time it might even be a Gungan, and the next time it might have even been a droid. Who knows? And then the foreground characters were all custom animated because they had specific actions they had to do.
Yeah, this one.
The idea was to, continue to give Jar Jar amusing kind of events that would allow him to, destroy a tank accidentally. In the particular case, the tank turn the tank around and have it going the wrong way, so it crashes into the other tanks. I mean, ultimately, it doesn't change the battle, but it does show that he actually was successful in fending off a lot of the droids and having an effect on the battle.
Put down your weapons. They win this.
So they only built a very small section of the hallway. In this case, we actually ended up rotoscoping all the people out in that first shot since their background didn't match. And now we've split in different pieces. And in some cases, we had to extend the people because they went out of the actual framing that they'd set up initially.
Okay, so we switched from the ship, Neimoidian ship being miniature, to computer graphics in this shot here. So the entire bay inside here is all computer graphics.
Everything's over here.
We shot some elements of steel on a grinding wheel for the sparks coming off the ship there.
Originally, there was a really complicated model we worked out in the Videomatic on the computer, which showed how the whole beam corridor worked and the timing of it. And we ran test cases of running little computer-generated model Jedis down the corridor and see how fast they would have to fight and how quick the doors would have to open and close to allow the story to proceed. The editing functions was kind of the the court of judgment as to the logic of things and do they fit together and will everything interconnect physically as well as emotionally that you want it to do.
This happened to be the very last set that we shot on episode 1, and Liam's death happened to represent the last shot of the film. It was an incredible 65-day period, which we had traveled to 3 different countries and had an amazing time. But when Liam was hit by Darth Maul with the lightsaber, that was it. That was the end of principal photography on episode 1.
These backgrounds were created by Ron Brown, most of them, using photographs that I shot in Central California and clouds and all, lots of clouds that he would put together with Photoshop and make these really exquisite backgrounds that we could put all of our creatures into. Now you're seeing the ground is starting to be scarred up.
Your little insurrection is at an end, Your Highness. Time for you to sign the treaty and end this pointless debate in the Senate.
Viceroy, your occupation here has ended.
After her!
This sequence was changed around a little bit because the Nemoidians get captured in this scene, and I sort of finished off this scene, and then later I took the end of the scene, rewrote it, and put it outside at the very end of the movie. So I moved it down further because there's still so much going on here that it didn't seem appropriate for it to happen during this environment. It needed to be separated and put out and get a more sense of completion.
The last section of the sword fight between Darth Maul and Ewan McGregor probably gave me the most pleasure cutting of all the sword fights because their performances in front of camera were superb. Ray Park as Darth Maul was, of course, an excellent martial artist and swordsman, and Ewan McGregor had really learned his choreography and his part very well. And they really went at it fast and furious, and there was good coverage of the fight, and it went together pretty smoothly, and I was satisfied with it. I've cut a lot of sword fights in my career, and that was certainly one of the most enjoyable.
It's a fairly classic plot device that has been around really for a very long time. It's an element in Greek drama that things get very dark and very sinister and then are resolved at the very last second. This is a classic following of that structure.
We have power. Shields up. Take this.
So we've got to get Anakin hit along with Queen captured. And Anakin's got to get trapped by a bunch of droids and inside the bad guy's palate.
Oops! We're losing power. There seems to be a problem with the main reactor.
Impossible. Nothing can get through our shield.
It's always nice to have this element, which I like a lot, which is to going into the castle of the bad guy, going right into the heart of the worst part of where all the bad guys are. They've put in very careful safety devices that have allowed them to have complete control over these droids, which is to put them all in one central location. But of course, at the same time, that makes a very vulnerable situation if someone were to get in there and destroy that control ship. I use the theme of overconfidence or hubris as a way of bringing the downfall of many people. And in this particular case, because Anakin is such a young kid, his heroism is more an accident than it is. The fact that he can even fly one of these things is amazing. But, I didn't want to make him, be perfect and have the ability to do all kinds of things that an 8-year-old boy really can't do.
Destroyed. Look! They are broken.
Some funny little numbers on their back. 1138 was on one of that right here.
That 1138 was kind of a combination of myself and the animation department. They wanted to get it in there somewhere, so I picked that shot and said, why don't you put it on the back of this guy?
You either cut Darth Maul in half or you don't. And it's an important decision for a filmmaker to make because you're really addressing the issue of the level of violence in the film. Do you need to actually cut him in two in order to make the point that he's been destroyed? Or do you keep him whole and let him get stabbed and fall down the hole? There was arguments back and forth, and I think George was sensitive to the level of violence in the movie.
It's too late. No. Promise me you won't scream the boy.
It's master. I'm kind of of the generation where I was about 5 or 6 when the first one came out, so they're more than just movies to me, and to be walking around here now is quite astonishing, really. Felt really different about playing this role from everything I've done. It's the biggest film I'll ever have made. And it's the biggest film you could ever make, I think. I can't imagine anything bigger, really. But yeah, I've been thinking about it in a very different way, I think. Because of its scale, and because of what Star Wars movies meant to me when I was a kid,
I've always had the joy of being able to work for one person, a writer, director. Most people have to work that I know of, my peers, people, are my closest friends who also do produce, they have writers and often 2 or 3 writers, often a director that they don't know that well. And I don't know if I could actually work on that. I much prefer when a writer is actually directing the movie. And I've had the luck, I guess, for me to be able to do that for the last 20 years. So it's been much more rewarding for me personally. I mean, I've done it the other way and it just isn't the same. Because when there's one voice, it's so easy. You pass this baton over and you get to just watch and enjoy the race. It's fantastic, Especially when it's somebody who's very clear about what it is he wants and knows how to get it. And if you have somebody as experienced as George who understands everybody's job, it just makes it that much easier.
Together, we shall bring peace and prosperity to the Republic.
Confer on you the level of Jedi Knight. The Council does.
You really get the impression that this imaginary world is truly real because there's so much going on in it, and there's a lot of detail. And I think one of the reasons these films are a lot of fun to watch over and over again is because a lot of material is there in layers. And if you stop and you watch the film, you'll see references to a lot of other story elements. And I think this adds to the whole texture of the movie. It gives it a density, which I think can really spark your imagination, gives the fullness to what's going on the screen.
I sense in you. Need that you do not. Agree with you, the Council does. Your apprentice, Skywalker, will be.
It was like working with the nicest people. They are the nicest, best actors and actresses that you will ever meet. They are really nice. They are very professional. They are just overall great. They're just the best.
There's no doubt the mysterious warrior was a Sith.
Always do. There are. No more.
This was a tricky shot. Originally, Yoda was shot with a hood, and George wanted him shot without a hood, so they shot that separately later on. So we had to split him in, but his lighting didn't really match, so we had to split him in and flicker the lighting and color balance him so he would blend in there seamlessly. So here we're into the whole parade sequence, and combination of miniatures for most of these backgrounds, along with the distant people were shot with digital video. The foreground people were shot with blue screen on film.
The final sequence in the film, the end parade, was also another sequence which I cut, and it was always a musically based sequence, as the finale of most of the Star Wars films have been. And George wanted, of course, a wild celebration. He wanted the audience to feel the same kind of jubilation that the people of Theed were experiencing. And of course, it was very important the score that Johnny Williams would write would be reflected in the visuals in terms of the rhythm and the style, the sensation emotionally.
we have this little bit of mystery of we've killed one Sith, but there's usually two of them, a master and an apprentice. And we know that the master is still alive, but the Jedi don't know that. But the antagonist in the movie is going to continue. Just because Darth Maul was killed doesn't mean that's the end of the bad guy.